you know, we all live very busy lives. We're all running around doing all sorts of crazy stuff. Sometimes it's good just to slow down, spend a little time with your family, do these old things to bring back those traditions, and then also to consume some really high quality food. I mean, this is not stuff that you're going to find at your local grocery store. This is
Yeah.
artisan. So the next step is probably the second most important step in the entire process. And that's actually allowing the meat to dry to
Right.
get to that ideal weight, right? So again, we in the example, we had a 10-pound piece of meat. We salted it with the proper amount of salt. We allowed it to equalize. We smoked it. Now what we need to do is dry it. This is the drying part in the dry cure process.
And you
And
hang it to dry, right?
you hang it to dry, and it needs to be in a room that is no warmer than 55 degrees.
Mm.
And that's very, very important. The meat is now stable enough to where 55 degrees isn't going to cause a tremendous amount of bacterial growth in the meat,
Right.
right? And the most important, and this is why I created a little cure room in my basement, but the most important thing that you have to do at this point, and it's counterintuitive to somebody who's doing this for the first time, is keep enough humidity in that room to allow that meat to dry. But wait a minute, I'm adding humidity so the meat can
Good
dry?
point. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. You need to add humidity. And what happens is, and I know you've tasted meat and you've seen this before. If you don't have enough humidity on the meat, the outside will
Right.
dry and the interior is raw. And what happens is you bite into it and it's like mushy in the middle and hard on the outside.
We had
It,
that.
yeah, right. And it's not good. And
Yeah.
so you have to, again, if you have like in the old world, they had a dirt basement, right? They would
Yeah, the
excavate a
floor. Yeah.
little,
Yeah.
right? And that created enough humidity where they didn't have to induce any humidity. In modern homes today and in modern life, we have concrete, and that doesn't provide enough humidity to allow the meat to cure properly. So you need to buy a little humidifier, and you want to keep that humidity at 80%.
Mm.
Now,
Pretty high.
different, it's very high, and so by trade, I'm in construction. 80% humidity in your house is very, very bad for your house, right?
Mhm.
If your
Yeah.
entire house was 80% humidity, you'd have a lot of problems. That's why you want to create a separate curing chamber. And that's again a whole nother branch that we could talk about. But you need to create a curing chamber, and you want to keep this meat at 80% humidity at least for the first 2-3 weeks, and then you can
Mm.
slowly decrease that humidity. And when I say slowly, I mean a couple points at a time.
Mm.
Very, very, very little decrease. So when that meat hangs, again, it's going to vary in terms of how long this is going to take. I've had meat that was ready to go, and again, based on the cut, based on how thick it is, you could be ready in 3 to 4 weeks, or it could take you, 6 to 8 months. It just depends on the cut
That's
of meat.
good. We want storage life. This is
Yeah,
how you store it. Yeah.
exactly. So you have the meat at 80% humidity, and you're weighing it. Now, one of the other
Right.
steps that we didn't talk about this in the beginning. Again, this is the details. When you weigh that meat the first time, you want to log that weight. So if my
Mm.
meat was 10 pounds, I need to log that somewhere. And what I like to do is I'll take a little piece of sausage casing and I write it on the sausage casing, and then I tag the piece of meat on the string. And so when that goes into my cure chamber, if that meat was 10 pounds originally, I'm ready to at least think about taking it out of the curing chamber when it weighs about 6.5 pounds.
Well, yeah, that
So
35% you were talking about earlier. Yeah.
correct. We need a 35%
Decrease.
minimum reduction in weight. For my personal taste, I prefer meat dried down to about 40%. So when it weighs
Yeah.
about 6 pounds, in my opinion, it's perfectly ready to
Perfect.
go. But you really, again, that humidity, I can't emphasize enough how critical that humidity is and keeping that humidifier full during this decrease, because all it takes, and trust me, this has happened to me, all it takes is that humidifier to run out of water for a couple days, and then you're going to start getting hardening.
Yeah, on the
Um,
outside of the
right.
surface. Yeah.
And it's critical with whole muscle, but
Sausages are even worse. They're you
I
have
was just going to
yeah.
say, sausages, it's imperative. You will ruin a batch of sausage very quickly if you're not monitoring that humidity. And again, once you've kind of you're taking the meat, you're going to take it off the hook, you're going to weigh it every week, kind of keep an eye on it, watch that decrease. If you're a nerd like I am, you're logging it on the wall, okay, now I know we're losing about X amount of ounces per week. I could kind of guesstimate how long it's going to take me at that point. So once that meat has hit that 35 or the sweet spot 40%, now you're ready to actually take the meat out, slice it up, and taste it. And hopefully you've done everything right and it's to your satisfaction at that point in time. Now the next step after that, oh, and by the way, I just want to mention again with this prosciutto, and I'll put a video out for this down the road. I had a 19-pound prosciutto, and when I just weighed it last week, when we started cutting into it, it was about 19.6 ounces. It weighed about 10.5 ounces, somewhere in there. So I lost
Wow.
close to 50% of the weight, and it was perfect. So again,
Wow. Okay.
each cut of meat's
Yeah.
going to be a little bit different,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's why I say that 35 is the beginning point, and then you can kind of dry it from there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we've got this piece of meat. We've got it to 40%. The next step, how are we going to store this thing, right? We know if we leave it in the open air, it's going to dry too much.
Continue to dry from here on.
It'll continue to dry. So I have to do something with it. And in the old country, they would consume it, right? But we're not going to consume that much meat in that short of period of time. So what I have found is vacuum sealing the meat is the way to stop the drying process and extend that shelf life. And once you've vacuum sealed that meat, leaving it on the counter is, it's possible. And actually, here's my preferred method. My preferred method is I vacuum seal it and I let it sit out for anywhere between 3 weeks to a month.
Wow.
And the reason I do that is because the center of the meat is still soft and pliable. The outside of the meat at this point is pretty firm. And by vacuum sealing it and leaving it at room temperature,
Equalizes this whole thing.
It creates a bit of an equilibrium. And now the skin of that piece of meat is really kind of soft and tender and delicious. Now you could do the same thing in your fridge. It's just going to take a lot longer. So what I do ideally is I vacuum seal it. I let it sit out for a little while, and then I'll either throw it in the fridge, and sitting in the fridge, I would say easily 6 months without an issue. Or ideally, I throw it in the freezer, and then when we're having guests over, or if I want a piece of meat, then I pull out one at a time or a whole bunch at once and, let it come to room temperature, slice it up, and have a party.
So I do have a couple of questions. Awesome. So you were saying that keep it below, it has to be below 55 degrees.
Yes.
80% humidity for 2 to 3 weeks. That is important. And then you start, so this process, and then you start decreasing slowly the humidity of the chamber in order to dry it. Now, how I'm assuming it's continuously has to be below 55 degrees.
Yep.
However, how low do you go with the humidifier? And then maybe let's just go with your example of what we were smoking this time. How long do you, for the loin, how long do you keep it after that 2 to 3 weeks? And how low do you go with the humidifier? And I know every cut is different, whether it had bone, whether it had like fat or how much of it, everything will be different. That's why you should check out his channel. He has awesome information and take notes there. But let's just go with the loin. What would I do with that?
So there is no definitive answer because there's so many different factors at play at this point in time. And so what you're doing is you're weighing that loin
Oh, yeah,
once a week.
right. Yeah.
You're weighing that loin once a week, and
Not by time, it's by weight that you have
correct, right. And so what you're really, 2 to 3 weeks is I would actually say keep the meat at 80% humidity as long as you can.
Mm.
As you're weighing it,
Mhm.
you're going to see it start obviously losing weight on a weekly basis, and then you'll kind of start seeing, okay, I'm losing X percent every week. Then once you get a couple weeks into it, whether it's 2, whether it's 3, sometimes it's 4, you could just take the humidifier down a notch or two. You never, ever, ever want it to be less than 70%.
Okay.
At less than 70%, the skin gets very hard very quick.
And it starts
So
cracking, yeah.
yeah, so it's between 70 and 80. You start at 80 and you want to work your way down to 70. And it's not mandatory. Again, it's not mandatory to work your way down to 70. You can keep it at 80 the entire time.
Based on your preference, I like drier, so that's why
Yeah.
I guess you're bringing it down, yeah.
Yeah, and you really want to watch the weight of the meat. If it's going down at a pretty good clip on its own, keep it at 80. You're fine.
Right.
It's not going to
Yeah.
cause any issues. I just take it down a little bit just to help speed up that process, but I don't want to take it down so much that the skin forms and then the center is soft.
Mm.
Yeah.
Very important fact here to remember is you have to watch out for your kids going into the room and with a knife and start cutting the sausages like how I used to do and get in trouble because at that point it's like getting ready, man. Like you have to log that chamber.
Oh yeah.
So fun memories. Yeah, I love it. Wow, that's a lot of information. So you were saying that it's by weight, and then the same weight rule applies for prosciutto, right?
Yep.
That's ham, right?
Yep. Right.
So, but that takes way longer. Can you what's the time frame for a ham? Like
it's very interesting.
pound?
Yeah. So this year it was the first year I tried to do a prosciutto by myself, and it's slightly intimidating because you're dealing with a large piece.
One you should do, yeah.
No,
sure.
Yeah, this is definitely you're on the advanced level, and now looking back on it, it's not as hard as I thought. It's probably a lot less taxing than, for instance, a loin, and here's why. So you follow the exact same process until you get into the curing chamber. Now, ideally, you want to keep that humidity as high as possible. So let's say 80% for an extended period of time. But at a certain point in time, when spring hits, let's say April, May, you just cut the humidity off completely. Mm-hmm. And what happens is the prosciutto has skin on the back side and the front side is open. And so that skin actually acts as a barrier to allow it to continuously dry at a slower pace. Mm-hmm. And so this year I stopped humidifying when I stopped humidifying the rest of the meats that were in my curing chamber. And then I just let it sit. Now, again, this is a whole nother process. Then you want to raise the temperature on that prosciutto to get it to I can't remember the term exactly, but it's not pickling, but what raising the temperature does is it gives it that classic aroma of prosciutto. When you cut into a nice prosciutto and you smell it, it has that just bouquet that just blows you away. So they raise the temperature, and as a matter of fact, in the South, when they make country hams, they leave them outside. Obviously, and they're outside, and that's what causes it to create that bouquet. And Italy and Croatia, same thing. They'll leave them outside. They want that wind, that draft to blow over the meat. Now, I shouldn't say the best prosciuttos, but obviously some of the best prosciuttos are made by the coastline, by an ocean, because that salty air is constantly washing over the meat. And allows that humid, salty air to continue to dry that meat. Yeah. So what I did this year is I kept it in my curing chamber, no humidity, got the temperature above 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and just let it go. And at the end of the day, when I pulled it out, it had that classic prosciutto aroma to it, and the meat was not hard at all. One side, the open side, was harder than the skin side. So one side
Mhm.
was a little bit softer, the other side was a little bit harder, and there's a vein of fat right down the middle. But I got to tell you, it was fantastic.
What we did, my father used to make prosciutto, um, shonka in Hungarian,
Yeah,
prosciutto. Yeah, when we did leave it outside, it was sort of like a wooden, well, crate, or I don't know how
yeah,
to say, but on two
hmm
sides it had the screen so the air
right,
could flow. So
exactly,
you still want to make sure that flies or anything like that don't go in there. But
right,
that skin, especially if you have like chili or whatever on the outside, it also protects it from a lot.
right,
So, and I want the viewers to understand that you get to store the meat this way because it's the process to store the
right.
meat. So you're not going against nature. You're
No,
not like forcing something to happen. This is the process, and it takes so long, and that's
right,
why you get to keep the meat, a very tasteful piece of meat, tasty piece of meat, for a long time. Without electricity, without
right,
anything. It's just the process that actually
correct.
demands that you store it this way.
Correct. And if you look at a whole hog, there are certain cuts of the whole hog that are going to be ready to consume earlier,
It
right?
will be like a process. You get to consume some parts earlier,
Right.
later, and so on.
So your
So
sausages are going to go first. They're going to be ready before anything else. Then the smaller whole cuts like the loins and the shoulders, and then at the end is essentially the large cuts like the prosciutto. Now, you start eating those sausages, let's say December, let's say February, and
right.
you're because again, back in the farm, you had nothing to eat from February until June, we'll
Yeah.
call it, and then at the end of the season, that prosciutto, you'd be pulling that out, usually when you would start harvesting the next hog. And
Yeah.
so that would kind of supply you with that. So each piece is different in terms of how long it'll store and when it's consumed.
Yeah. My father used to make a sausage that was really dry, almost like beef jerky dry, and it
Hmm.
would be like hard as a stick or something. So we would leave some just for later, but that's for our own taste, like my father and me. No,
Yeah.
not everyone like that, but we like that very dry meat. So it's a process. You have to know what you're doing, but what do you recommend people should start with, and like what type of meat? And yeah, well, how should they do it? Knowing all this fact, is there anything that they should watch out for?
Yeah. So ideally, the simplest and tastiest, one of the tastiest, one of my favorites, pieces of meat to start with is a pork loin. And if you purchase a whole pork loin, you could break it down into 4 small sections that are each going to be between 8 to 10 inches. And so you could even cure those in Ziploc bags in
Hmm.
your refrigerator. So if you're really kind of curious and you want to try it, you don't want to make a large investment, pork loin will cost you less than $20. The salt
Right.
is, inconsequential. It doesn't matter. You do this process, you put it in a Ziploc bag, you cut each piece, you quarter it, you put each piece into a Ziploc bag, you cure it. You're just pulling it out during the equalization period and putting it in a new bag. Once it's equalized, then you could smoke it, or you could just go right into the drying process. It's up to your taste and what you have around you, how much effort you want to put into it. And then you have to dry it properly, and you could dry it in a very small little chamber. And again, you just want to keep it at the right temperature. There's other products. Certainly you could go, there's a couple different websites that sell certain products that you can actually, it's like a collagen wrap that you can wrap the meat with.
Hmm.
And then that will allow it to slowly cure where you're not as concerned about the humidity. You could keep it at a much lower humid, in a lower humid environment. So again, not the traditional way of doing it, but if you want
Right.
to give it a shot and you
Yeah,
don't
that's an
have,
easy start. Yeah.
yeah, that's definitely a way to start. And then, your investment in all this, it's really not the monetary investment, it's the time
Time.
investment, because this
But
is really a lot of time to do this
it's a
stuff.
hobby, and you get to do it with your family. It's
It, it's, it's,
perfect.
it's a delicious hobby. And, My wife always teases me because all my hobbies have to be delicious hobbies. So I smoke and dry and cure meats. I make my own wine. We make our own brandy, and everything is
You're a
revolved
good
around.
friend to have around.
Yeah.
You know,
my,
woodworker is also good, but you
yeah, yeah.
know.
My buddies always joke when, when stuff hits the fan, we're coming to your house because we
Yeah,
know we're going to be in good hands.
very good, very good.
So,
So this membrane, just a couple of seconds
yeah.
on it. So I did see this quite recently. It's almost like a
Mhm.
type of, it looks like a Ziploc bag, but it's actually a membrane, and you put
Yeah,
it in, you seal it in, and it helps the moisture escape, right? And
correct.
inside of it, the meat dries.
Correct. And you could
Yeah.
just leave it in your
And that's very
refrigerator.
easy to do. So
Yeah,
maybe you can send me the product. We can link people
sure.
to that. That's at least for the taste, you can try out dried meat. It's
Right.
not necessarily for the long storage process. You won't be able, I'm assuming you won't be able to do prosciutto that way, but just for easy cuts of meat, that's an interesting stuff to try out. Now, if you have a couple of more minutes,
Yeah.
let's talk about food. I know this was actually just a process, but prepared food. What do you prepare from it? I mean, I just love to eat it as is. I could live off of it, but I know there's certain traditional Eastern European style dishes that
Yeah.
demand this type of food. The slanina, thinking about stuffed cabbage and everything
Yeah.
that, you know. Can you talk maybe just a couple? Because a lot of people ask me like, hey, can you send me some recipes? Well, I'm going to be sending them to you because you actually have the full
Yeah.
preparing process for the food. Could you give us a couple of examples? What do you do with some cuts and how do you consume it and why your family loves you so much?
Right. So um, I would say in terms of recipes, you have to remember again, um, this is all our tradition, our history. And so people have been doing this for hundreds of thousands of
Yeah.
years, and they've come up with really good pairings, right?
Yeah.
And again, we're from the mountains in Croatia. Our green that we grow is cabbage
Yeah.
because it's cold up in the mountains.
Yeah.
Once you
Same
get
with
down to
our
the
people. Yeah.
when you get down to the coast, their greens are different. They're typically Swiss chard or collard greens or things like that. But up where we're from, it's cabbage, and so we make
And
our own
potatoes. Yeah.
cabbage and potatoes and a piece of dried meat. And I'm telling you,
You're good.
you're good, and you're good for a long time. So typically dry cured meats would go into something that has a cabbage type, sauerkraut type base. Now, here's one thing I just want to note, and this is pretty important. In doing research on curing meats and nitrates and nitrites, and that's a whole nother topic that we're not going to get into right now. But if you choose to put nitrates and nitrites into your meat, you have to be aware that cooking with anything that has nitrate, cure number 2, Instacure number 2, is strictly forbidden. So you don't want to cure, let's say, for instance, a bacon and add a pork belly and add Instacure number 2 to it, and then you think, oh, this is just regular bacon, and now you slice it and you throw it in a frying pan. There's a chemical reaction that occurs with that nitrate that will actually form a carcinogen, and you could get cancer from
Yeah,
that.
that's why I stay away from nitrates and stuff like that. But you're
Right.
saying as long as you're not cooking it and consuming it raw or
It's
uncooked, which
right.
you can after it has been dried and gone through the process. We
Right.
used to eat raw slanina all the time.
All the time.
Yeah, with some onions, and there you go with a piece of bread.
Right. So that's just a little side note, and I
Yeah.
definitely wanted to mention it. Instacure number 2 in particular is not to be cooked ever. Now, back to recipes. Me personally, I like, one of my favorite things growing up as a kid was sarma, which is the stuffed cabbage roll. So we would pickle a whole head of cabbage and then
Yeah.
peel the leaves off, and then you mince meat and you put it in there with some rice and you roll it up and you cook it. And then, so my mom would add slanina into the minced meat, so it gave it that little smoky flavor. And then
Right.
we would put ribs inside, so
Ribs
dry cured
in
ribs.
the pot.
Oh,
So we'll have a
Oh,
link to this recipe on your in the description, because we're just going off, but he has like exact process on how you do
yeah.
it. Yeah.
And then obviously, any of the dry cured meats, slicing them, making them into sandwiches, charcuterie boards. I mean,
Best thing ever. Yeah.
there's just nothing better than that. Other than that, I gotta say, like, so we do a lot of sauerkraut with the dry cured meats. I'm trying to think. There's a bunch of other recipes. I'm just
Sometimes
not.
if it was a saltier thing, we would
Yeah.
put it in a soup.
Yeah.
Or you first, let's say, bean soup,
Yeah.
um,
Oh,
whole bean soup. But you would have to probably boil the water and dump the water because it would be too salty the
too
first
salty.
time.
Yeah.
And then you would do the bean soup. There's definitely food that
Oh
is
yeah, that's my
required.
other favorite actually. We call it in Croatian, we call it gra, which literally translates to beans.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
but it's a stew, and it starts off with essentially you put carrots, onions, and then cured ham hocks into the
Yeah.
meat, and then pork ribs, and then you let that all boil for a really long time until it's all falling apart. And
Yeah.
of course, there's beans in there, kidney beans, white beans, some celery, and then you put a roux, or what we call a zaprashka, which is you take a little bit of oil, some flour, a little bit of red paprika, mix it up, and then pour
Oh
it in, and
yes. Yeah.
it thickens that stew. And then the region where we're from will actually throw sauerkraut into that. And I got to tell you, oh my God.
That's food right there. That's a family type of food.
So
Yeah,
good.
and slow cooking is very
Slow,
important for these ethnic foods. And I
right?
saw you have the same large dish, or like pots that we do. So
Yeah, yeah.
where you
Long,
cook it.
slow cooks, you
Yeah,
know.
long slow cooks is the way to
Yeah,
go for sure.
yeah.
Wow, that was a trip, man.
Lots of
Memory
information now.
lane, but also like good information right here.
And I all we touched on was whole muscle curing.
Yeah,
We didn't even get into sausage. And with sausage, it's another. I mean, there's
it's its own book, you know. Yeah.
exactly.
We'll have to
So,
have you back if you would be okay with that, to talk about sausage. We have been making sausage, but since we don't smoke it, there's other ways how we used to store it in lard actually.
oh,
Once you cook the the sausage, you put it
mhm.
in lard, but lard needs to cover the full thing. It makes a seal, but that wasn't smoked. So there are things. Now back to the cabbage, because I don't want to let you away. How do you make your sour cabbage? We used to do it in these barrels
Yep,
actually, and full cabbage with salt, and
yeah,
we would turn the water, or then mix the water a couple of times, depending on weekly or daily,
right.
where and how it is. Do you make sour cabbage at home in barrels or smaller
Yeah,
containers?
and as a matter of fact, I store it in my cure room.
Yeah.
And so,
It's,
yeah, because it's all in one spot, right? That's you're keeping it all right there. And essentially, I've got a recipe for it on my site, but you core out the center of the cabbage.
yeah,
You peel off the bad
bottom.
leaves.
Yeah.
I fill that core with salt, and then I stack them core up so the salt doesn't spill out. I stack them in a food grade plastic barrel, high density polyethylene barrel, and then I stack them around. And you could quarter some cabbage. You could
It
shred some
gets
cabbage.
faster, so you could consume those faster.
Exactly, and you fill in those gaps with that. And then once you get to the top, I was taught you're supposed to put a weight on top of the
Yes,
cabbage.
because it will come up, and everything that is above water will have mold on it. But as long as it's
Correct.
under, so it's anaerobe fermentation, basically, without air fermentation. Yeah.
Correct. And it's a lactic fermentation. So,
Very good for your stomach as well. Yeah,
oh, it's the best for your
yeah,
stomach. It's the
stomach
best food
issues.
you could
Yeah.
eat. Yeah. So interestingly enough, again, when I asked my, the people around me, hey, how do you guys make sauerkraut? And a lot of them were telling me that they take vinegar and pour it into the barrel. And that's
Mm.
actually a different bacteria. And
Right. Yeah.
that's why a lot of times their sauerkraut would start to rot
Mm-hmm.
because it's not the right it's not the right process. So with sauerkraut, essentially what you're doing is a lactic fermentation, and it has to be at the right temperature. So if you start your sauerkraut here in Chicago after September, you're going to have a very long fermentation. We
Right.
always want sauerkraut ready right around Christmas time so we can make those stuffed cabbage rolls. So you start in September when the temperatures are still warm out. And if you pay attention, once all that cabbage goes into the barrel and you got your weight on it and you pour all your water in there, you'll watch and you'll see bubbles coming up. And that's the fermentation naturally starting because
Hmm.
of the bacteria, the yeast that's on the leaves will actually start spontaneously fermenting. And then as it gets older, it gets more sour and it gets sour and it'll actually start to soften and yellow the cabbage.
Yes. Yeah.
And then with that cabbage, we cook with it as a sauerkraut. We also shred it very finely and make salad out of it. You just add a little bit of oil and some pepper, no salt, no vinegar because it should be sour enough and it's definitely salty enough. And we just eat that as a fresh salad in the wintertime as
Yeah,
well.
we used to eat it as a side, like the
Yeah.
leaf, you cut them up and you eat it as a side. Now, for the weights, what you do is, since these are whole cabbages or
Yeah.
close to whole cabbages, what we used to put is a couple of woods, like pieces
Hmm.
of wood, like that and that. So make sure that nothing comes above the water, and put weight on it with a couple of cleaned rocks, and that everything has
Yeah.
to be sanitized and you keep it underwater. But if
Right.
people want to try it out in a small scale, you could do like shredded cabbage in
Yes.
smaller jars. There are specific jars, and we can have a link there as well, with an aerator that air, well, it's actually carbon dioxide that it can escape, but air cannot
Correct.
go on in it. So there's ways how to do that. But you
Yeah.
were very important point that if you want it to be ready by Christmas, then you start early. But if you want to
Right.
actually use it as a storing process and without
Right.
electricity, storing food, then you can start in the winter times, and then because of the
Right.
temperature, it lasts longer. So once you know the process, it's really up to you what you want to do with it.
Right. And you could actually do, so those jars that you're talking about are
Yes.
fantastic. You just put them on
Yeah,
your
we have a
countertop in
couple.
your kitchen. Yeah. You put them on your countertop in your kitchen and they stay at room temperature and the fermentation process occurs much quicker.
Yeah.
When we do it, I usually do 16 to 20 heads of cabbage. And then that's, the sauerkraut that we'll eat for the entire year. But if you
But
want to
these
do
small
2 or
things.
3 heads, you just do them in the jars on your countertop, and you constantly have a fresh batch of fermented
Yeah.
sauerkraut.
And if
You could
at any
also
point you go ahead.
you could also add carrots, cauliflower, all different root vegetables.
Yeah.
There's so many other things that you could ferment that same way, and the bacterial health that it brings to your gut. I mean, it's
Much better
it's
than
so
any
healthy.
medicine you could take. Yeah.
Absolutely,
In my
absolutely.
opinion, in our
I agree.
unprofessional opinion, but
Yeah,
yeah,
of course, of
definitely.
course. But it's so healthy for you.
Yeah, yeah, very
So
good. We do sometimes keep it in a or either cover it with a rag or something, so it
yeah,
it helps if it's in dark, but depending on how you consume it, doesn't necessarily have to be.
right.
Wow, thank you very much. Is there anything that you would like to tell to the viewers? Is there anything that you would like to say?
I first off, I'd like to thank you for this opportunity, and then I'd also like to thank the people who have subscribed to my channel. Like I said, I just started doing this as a log for my children, for the future, and I just can't even believe that people like my content and watch it. So thank you to everybody who watches and supports. And really, the other thing I would like to just let people know is try doing some of this stuff because, you know, we all live very busy lives. We're all running around doing all sorts of crazy stuff. Sometimes it's good just to slow down, spend a little time with your family, do these old things to bring back those traditions, and then also to consume some really high quality food. I mean, this is not stuff that you're going to find at your local grocery store. This is artisan.
Definitely.
This is stuff that, I'm proud of. I know when I go to a party, you know, people expect me when I walk into a party to
Yeah.
have 2 bottles of red wine and a little bit of some kind of dry cured meat, right? And it's like a joke. If I come to a party and I don't bring it, they're like, "Hey, what's going on?" So
Yeah.
this is something that you could share not only with your family but with your friends, and it's so this is really funny. My wife always says, you guys are always getting together and trying and curing meats and all this other stuff. And I told her, I said, honey, listen, if we didn't do this stuff, we would never see each other. We literally would, because we all have kids, we all have
Right.
jobs, we all have all sorts of other stuff going on in life. This is my opportunity to get together with my friends and to actually do something productive, to do something fun,
Yeah.
And then the benefit of it is you're creating this really high quality food that's a natural, chemical-free, preferably chemical-free process. And it's just good for you, and it brings you back to your roots. And, I think in our lives, we just spend way too much time chasing, and not slowing down and enjoying the moment. And this is the slowing down and enjoying the moment. This is what I do to slow down and enjoy the moment. So I would hope that, people would try this, and maybe it's not your thing to do, 150, 200 pounds of meat a year, but hey, if you do 5 or 10, give it a shot, see what happens. And if you like it, go with it.
Yeah. Very, very well said. And for building community, and you will get to give gifts and to other people that nobody else will be able to.
Yeah.
So, man, it would be nice to live close to you.
When you're in, give me a call.
Hey, thank you very much, and I would love to have you back on the channel if that's fine with
Absolutely.
you.
Sure.
Everyone, be sure to check out his channel. It's dedicated to good food, good drinks, and good friends. Thank you very much for being on the show, John. I absolutely love this discussion.
Thank you, Adbad. Appreciate the time.